it's been humiliation for Iran that they've launched these two huge missile attacks, and they've basically been completely ineffective. You don't need to respond to that, but I'm afraid Netanyahu has said that he is going to. Equally, the Iranians, shouldn't be getting involved in this. It's really not their business, and they have these proxies that are creating unrest and conflict all around the Middle East. So they are a profoundly malign piece of this jigsaw, and in a way, we have lots of sanctions on them, but we should find stronger ways of trying to stop them.
Israel says it has sent more troops into Lebanon this morning. It says it is a limited, localised and targeted mission, which of course is how all military quagmires begin. There doesn't seem to be that much going on diplomatically to reduce the fighting, let alone bring about a solution to the region's troubles. The coming US presidential election seems to be slowing things down too. Let's speak to Lord Kim Darroch, former British ambassador to the US and former national security advisor. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Obviously, many people are focusing on this because of the 1-year anniversary mark that happened yesterday. It's a very broad question, but if you were to be asked, has diplomacy failed since October the 7th, what would your answer be?
Up to a point, you can say diplomacy has failed, because clearly what is happening now is exactly the escalation that we in the West have always feared would emerge from that, from the 7th of October, those horrible events on the 7th of October, and from the Israeli response to them. But it is, as you say, a much bigger question, because I spent 44 years in the Foreign Office, and there was never a moment when there weren't diplomatic efforts going on to try to achieve some sort of durable solution to the whole issue of Israel-Palestine. And there have been moments when there have been negotiations going on that have got quite close. Sometimes it's been the Palestinians who've missed the opportunity. Sometimes you've had an Israeli leadership that really hasn't been prepared to commit to a solution. And throughout all of that, you've had a wider Arab world that has never really said to Israel, if you do this deal, then we will guarantee that peace, we will support you, we will never attack you, we will never harbour proxy forces that attack your terrorist. So you've never had that wider reassurance from the Arab world that they would not threaten Israel. Put all of that together, and you do have more than 5 decades worth of failure, but it is extraordinarily difficult. All that said, I think the clash you're seeing now between Iran and Israel is one of the most dangerous moments in the history of all of this. And I also think that whatever Prime Minister Netanyahu says about complete victory, whether over Hamas or Hezbollah, it's not going to happen. And the only solution to what is going on is going to be a diplomatic or political one, achieved through diplomacy.
I suppose the next question is not really about diplomacy. I will come back to that. But should certain countries be showing more restraint, or is this about not losing face, basically? Because if you feel that you're being attacked, you have to retaliate. But some countries, again, I don't know, some countries are more in the network of diplomacy, perhaps, than others. And I wonder whether, do the same rules apply to all the individual countries involved here, or do they apply differently?
Look, I think as far as Israel and Iran are concerned, who are the 2 points of real sort of concern and potential wider conflict at the moment. We've had the Iranian missile attack, the second one they've done, which completely failed.
Yeah.
And I think you can argue, and I'm sure that both European and American diplomats are arguing this to Israel at the moment, that you could basically leave it at that, because it's been humiliation for Iran that they've launched these two huge missile attacks, and they've basically been completely ineffective. You don't need to respond to that, but I'm afraid Netanyahu has said that he is going to. Equally, the Iranians, shouldn't be getting involved in this. It's really not their business, and they have these proxies that are creating unrest and conflict all around the Middle East. So they are a profoundly malign piece of this jigsaw. And in a way, we have lots of sanctions on them, but we should find stronger ways of trying to stop them. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, look, Europe and America will all be arguing very strongly for restraint. And I think it's quite striking that, on the whole, the response from Arab countries is quite muted. I mean, they have no love for Hamas, they have no love for Hezbollah, and certainly no love for Iran.
Well, what about the American situation then? You're a former British ambassador to the US, and many people talk about what is going on in the Middle East in the context of the the presidential elections. If the presidential elections were not happening, if we just had one, or we were midterm or whatever, do you think things would be different? Would America be clearer about what it thinks and what it wants?
I think that's a fair question. For what it's worth, I think that the Biden administration has gone further than most observers would have expected in terms of the pressure it has been putting on Israel. And there was a point back in May when they said they were going to withhold certain arms supplies to Israel because of the then impending Israeli movement into Rafah. And some of the things said by President Biden have been quite exceptional. But in any circumstances, expecting America, with its historic support for Israel, to go farther than it has done, I think it's profoundly unlikely. And that's all before you get to the reality that we're 4 weeks after an election, which is one of the tightest looking elections in history. So added all that together, yes, of course, America could find ways of putting still more pressure on Israel to de-escalate. But historically, if you look at the record, there's just very, very little chance of that, whoever is in the White House.
Okay. Lord Darroch, thank you very much for talking to us. That's Lord Kim Darroch, former British ambassador to the US and former national security advisor. Israel is telling people in southern Lebanon to keep away from the sea. Will a Navy attack follow? Let's speak again to Richard Spencer, the Times' correspondent in the region. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning.
What do you think this means?
Well, it's clear that the Israelis are going to expand their, at the moment, rather limited operation in southern Lebanon in terms of the ground fighting. I mean, they've made these 2 or 3 incursions across the border to go after the Hezbollah tunnels and rockets that are just on the other side of the border. The key thing here is not just that you can't go to the beach anymore in Lebanon, which is one of the pleasures of living in Lebanon, because it's the sea's there whether the rest of the country is being blown up or not. It's also the extent to which they've said, which is up as far as the Awali River, which is north of the Litani River, which is the river they normally cite as the limit of their ambitions, because that's a river that Hezbollah are supposed to have retreated behind under terms of a UN resolution. So they're saying up to the Awali River, which is further north. They're clearly going to start operations on the coastal area, including looking at boats. They specified, not just going to the beach, but also not taking to the sea, for example, fishermen. That implies quite a sort of heavy and significant operation up there.
And in terms of what's happening in Israel, clearly, fighting battles on many fronts, there have, in response, been rocket attacks from all sides into Israel.
Yeah, there were. We know that Hezbollah, which is still, that war there that Israel's fighting, it's only just started really in terms of serious attempts to get to destroy the huge Hezbollah missile arsenal. So they're still sending lots of rockets over the northern border. We had a couple of volleys of rockets from Gaza yesterday. Again showing how difficult this war is if the Israelis really do want to destroy Hamas. Here we are exactly a year after the operation of October 7th, the massacre of October the 7th, and still, Hamas is still able to put rockets in the air.
And the other attack that may come from Israel, of course, apart from into Lebanon, is Iran. Are you surprised at the time that has elapsed since the rocket attacks on Israel? Would you have expected them to respond more quickly or not?
No, they always said that there would be a time of their choosing. It was also, they didn't say, but it was also clear that this was a major issue that required discussion with the United States. And there have been a lot of negotiations and debates with the White House. Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, is on his way to Washington to meet his counterparts, and no doubt meet President Biden there as well. This is, the extent of the Israeli action against Iran is a much bigger issue than fighting the war in Gaza, because Iran has the ability and has said it will retaliate more widely than just against Israel if Israel really does escalate to a high level. For example, hitting the nuclear installations that everyone talks about. That would put American bases in the Middle East at risk, and obviously risk a much wider war. And although America has given a huge amount of leeway to Israel to act in the Middle East, for Israel to start a broad war that would put Americans at risk without agreement from America would be a step too far, I think.
Mm. And many people obviously still thinking about the 1 year mark since October the 7th. I wonder, again, with your experience of the region, if 1 year on, 1 year and 1 day on, is this a situation that you would have foreseen that the Middle East would be in following what happened on October the 7th?
Yeah, I mean, the standard rule in the Middle East at least in the last 15, 20 years, maybe the last century, is, if you put out the scenarios that could happen at any stage, choose the worst one and then make it slightly worse, is, that's where you're likely to be. I don't think anyone thought this war in Gaza would have lasted so long. I think we, those of us who look at these things, underestimated Israel's will, or perhaps not Israel, in fact, Netanyahu's will to keep up a war of this intensity. Netanyahu's very belligerent, and he's very subtle in the way he manipulates his rivals and his enemies, both domestically and internationally. But he's always been quite cautious. And so if you'd said, Netanyahu is going to launch a war that will last a year, cause hundreds of Israeli soldiers to be killed, and possibly launch other wars on other fronts, I think we'd have said, no, that's not Netanyahu's style. But now he's started, I think he's tapped into an Israeli sense of resilience, I guess, is the word people would use, and determination, and of course, their sense of existential threat that the attacks of October the 7th, reawakened. It was, as everyone has said, the worst single loss of life, Jewish life, since the Holocaust. It really did wake something up. I mean, I wrote yesterday in my piece for the paper about all the memorials. What's incredible about it is you see all these kind of basically people you'd think of as hippies if you saw them in the West, guys with long hair, and going to these memorials to their friends who were at this dance party. They're in flip-flops and baggy shorts and t-shirts, and they're all saying, yeah, well, I'm back in the army tomorrow and I'm going to sock it to Hamas. It has reawakened perhaps the martial spirit in Israel. That's pretty impressive in some ways, but of course it's also quite frightening in the sense of, how far could this war go now?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Richard, thank you for your reflections. That's Richard Spencer. He is a Times correspondent in that particular region.
That line there is awful, that if you're predicting what's happening in the Middle East, think of the worst scenario and make it a little bit worse. That's one that will linger in the mind, I think.